Hey guys, how are you? What's going on? Jordan here again. Jumping on another live stream today. I've been enjoying doing these. Going to talk a little bit about mixing in mono. What's the deal with mixing in mono? You guys have probably heard a lot of professional mixers and other, vloggers, bloggers, whatever, talk about how mixing in mono is a big deal. How it makes a big difference. And I heard this, from years and years and years ago when I was just starting out, and I kind of used to try it, and I never really got it. It just was always very confusing for me until I really finally grasped why it works. So I'm going to tell you, what the deal is with mixing in mono and when you should use it, how you should use it, and also what you can kind of ignore about it. So yeah, I've been enjoying jumping on here in these live streams recently, and kind of sharing some things with you that have been on my mind for a while. By the way, if you want to go more in depth on some recording, editing, mixing training in a live setting, I'm doing some live webinars coming up. Just go to freerecordingclass.com to see the next one that's on the schedule and see if you can make it. Sign up there, and we'll get some more stuff to help you have breakthroughs in your work. But back to mixing in mono. So I never got it because people would just say mix in mono. Like, you have to mix in mono. And they wouldn't really give a reason for it, right? And so I would be mixing and I would hit the mono button, or I would, use a plugin or something, or just, pan everything on the master fader to the middle. And things would just sound so weird. Like, mostly the balance would be all off, right? The stuff that's up the middle gets like really loud, and the stuff that's on the sides gets like really quiet, and it's like really hard to it's almost impossible to do a balance, because like you could start moving the faders in mono and you're doing the balance, and then all of a sudden you switch back to stereo and it's like, oh my gosh, this just sounds brutal. It's all over the place. So that didn't work for me. But let me tell you why mixing in mono works. Actually, I'm going to spin around and put this down so I can use both of my hands here. Hopefully you guys, there we go. So I want you to think about how you can achieve separation in your mixes. The easiest way, the simplest way when you're dealing with a stereo mix, is simply just panning, right? You can put some stuff over here, you can put some stuff over here, you can put some stuff in the middle. That in itself instantly creates separation in your mix, creates space between elements, literally, like almost in a physical sense, because you got something coming out of this speaker and something coming out of this speaker. Physically, there's space, they're in their own space. So that's one way to get separation in your mixes. The other way to get it is with EQ, and basically with separating things in the frequency spectrum, right? So you've got panning and like physical position of tracks, and then you've got the frequency spectrum. So the reason why mixing in mono helps so much with that is because I kind of think panning is, obviously you can't just have everything panned up the middle. Like, we have to have, your rhythm guitars out wide, you have to have stereo, you have to have some tracks out wide. I really mostly do left, center, right mixing for the most part. So that is all great. But zoom out, think about someone listening in an environment that's like, they're not sitting right in front of two speakers, and they're also not listening on headphones. Like, in those situations, your panning separation, the effectiveness of it is like really, really diminished, right? So, geez, even if like I'm in my room sitting right in front of my two studio monitors, like literally right here behind the camera here, even if I back up 5 feet from these speakers, guess what happens to that panning separation? The sound's coming out, it's coming closer together, everything's getting stacked on top of each other, right? So all of a sudden, that nice separation I had via panning is pretty much gone, right? So, and likewise with headphones, like maybe listening to headphones, obviously, yeah, you get lots of wide separation, but again, once they're listening on other speakers or in a different environment, that separation's gone. Think of someone listening in their car, right? They're not even sitting in the middle of the speakers in the first place, or if it's being played, in someone else's house and they're hearing the music, or if you're lucky enough to work on really big records and it's being played in a shopping mall, and you're just walking through the mall hearing the song, like there's no way you're getting the stereo field. So basically, panning works, but in all of these other situations where you're not listening in an environment that people are really having the different space between the two sides, then your panning separation is a lot less relevant. So that's where the frequency separation comes in. And this is why mixing in mono works, because it takes away your panning moves, right? So as soon as you hit that mono button, everything that's spread out here goes, or maybe more accurately like this, everything is now stacked on top of each other. So all your instruments that you had panned out, and they all have their own little space and they're all sounding pretty separate, all of a sudden now they're all just sitting on top of each other. And so what that does is it reveals where things are overlapping and where different instruments are masking other instruments, right? So maybe before you had, for example, let's say you had your rhythm guitars left and right, and you had a lead guitar or a synth. Let's call it a synth. Let's say your rhythm guitars out here, your synths up the middle, and that sounds great. You can really hear each of them really well in a normal stereo mix. Then you hit mono, and all of a sudden that synth gets kind of buried because it's sharing a lot of the same frequency range as the guitars. So when you put them all on top of each other like that, all of a sudden that separation is gone. So by mixing in mono, and specifically doing EQ in mono, you're forced to really face where that overlap is happening, and where the masking is happening, and where things are really fighting too much, or where certain areas of the frequency range are too crowded, right? So that's what I use mono for when I'm mixing, and I actually don't do any like level balancing or almost no other decision making in mono except for doing my major EQ moves, especially kind of in the first half of the mix process when you're really doing the big EQ carving and making those decisions. That's when mono is so useful. And don't worry about the balance. Don't worry about changing the relationship of the faders when you're mixing in mono. I would just worry about that EQ balance and the frequency response that happens when you stack everything on top of each other. So it's so useful because to me, it just became very, very easy to find where to put things. Like I would switch into mono to do some EQ and be like, oh, I totally can't hear that lead guitar. I can't hear that synth. So then you can pull up an EQ, do a little boost, move it around until that instrument pops out. And sometimes it's where you wouldn't expect it at all. I mean, I've had times where I've put everything into mono, and then I've had like a guitar layer or like a synth layer, and I ended up boosting at like 650 hertz because that just happens to be where it really pokes through the mix. Meanwhile, if I was normally mixing in just like my normal stereo mix, I probably would never think to boost 650 hertz on that synth, but it just works great because, again, by collapsing everything so that it's all sitting on top of each other, now all of a sudden you really start to hear where things are not coming through and where things are really fighting each other for space in the mix. So I hope that makes sense, guys. I know it's, especially starting out, I know it's, even for me, I think it took me a number of years mixing and recording to really understand why this works, because mono can be weird. It can kind of throw you for a bit of a trip because stuff just sounds weird. Like I said, the balance gets really off. So I hope that helps. And again, it's not about doing your final balance or your automation, your faders and stuff like that. It's about doing the EQ specifically for that frequency range separation, making sure stuff is not sitting too much on top of each other. And that's the best way to do it. And the reason it matters, guys, is again, because if you're just using panning to get that separation, that stuff's all going to collapse in like a lot of scenarios for a lot of people who are listening to your stuff. So that's why it becomes important to have not only that spatial separation with panning, but it becomes even more important to have that frequency separation. So whether they're listening on headphones and they have, ultimate left-right separation, it's still going to really help your mixes that way. And then if they're listening somewhere where the speaker's 15 feet away from them in the room, and so there is no panning is not a factor, then it's also going to help there, because eventually all those sounds, by the time it reaches you, it's all just one sound, or you're not getting like left and right independent sources, and it's just like, all the instruments are going to have their own space because you've done that work. So hopefully that's helpful. That really changed the game for me. Yeah. By the way, I'm going to be sharing some other breakthroughs, some of the big aha moments when it comes to recording, when it comes to editing and mixing each three of those parts, since they all work together. I'm going to be sharing 3 more breakthroughs like this in an upcoming free training. Just go to freerecordingclass.com if you want to jump on the next live call I'm doing about those topics. I hope to see you there, but I hope this helps you. If you can, just fire up a mix right now and hit mono, switch it into mono, use one of the free plugins that do it, or if your monitor controller has a mono button, that's the easiest way. And just think of an EQ. All right, you can even change your balance so that you put everything at a balance that sounds good in mono, so that you can do the EQing. Then pop it out of mono once you're done doing the EQ, and then get your balance where it needs to be. All right, so I think that's really going to help your mixes. So hope to see you on the next live call at freerecordingclass.com. Otherwise, we'll talk to you again soon.